Welcome everybody to our webinar with Chantell, Ashley and Monty, and myself, Kevin. A couple of little housekeeping things before we start. We are recording the session, so it will be made available to you tomorrow. And please feel free to answer questions using the Q&A. We will endeavour to get to the questions that you ask at the end and try and answer as many of them as we can. So let's start off by having a look at who we've got with us. We've got Chantell with us today, who, along with Clem Sunter, have probably formed a dynasty around scenario planning, and certainly in South Africa and further afield. So she was also speaking at our conference earlier this year, so I'm very pleased that she was able to join us today. We've got Ashley, who's a bit of a rock star in the finance world of higher education. Also up for CFO of the Year, so that's very pleased to have him joining us as well. And then we've got Monty Stephenson, who's got a wealth of experience in auditing as well as in the retail sector. And again, very pleased to have him joining us today. Then myself, I'm Kevin Phillips. I'll be coordinating the session today. And effectively, I basically run with a technology company specializing in budgeting, forecasting, modeling, and reporting, which is fairly pertinent at this time of our evolution, I guess. So what I want to do is hand over the reins to Chantell, and let her take you through her scenarios for the next 12 to 18 months in South Africa. Chantell.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everybody. All right, so basically, I'm a scenario strategist. So in times of uncertainty, strategy becomes an incredibly important discipline, and all of us actually have to start thinking strategically, and it's been highlighted with obviously the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we're far enough into the pandemic to actually start to realize there are a number of uncertainties that are emerging. I think we're getting a little bit of a collision between politics and science and economics and society and technology. And those collisions are creating an uncomfortable space that we're sitting in. So in order to deal with an uncomfortable space strategically, we need to make sense of the uncertainty and of the next 12 to 18 months. And the tool to use for that is scenarios. So what I would like to do is just take you briefly through what's happening globally in the scenarios, then translate that into our South African scenarios and some of the uncertainties we need to think about. And then, of course, we can have discussions around different industries and different businesses and what it means going forward. But just to say up front, in the work that I've been doing, there's not one industry or one company at this point in time that doesn't have to revisit and review their current strategy, or alternatively almost throw that strategy out of the window and start on a new strategy. So it is an important point in time to be able to have a framework in order to think and maneuver through the next 12 to 18 months. So Kevin, if you could put my slides up. Okay, so I just want to start very quickly with the global scenarios, and I've taken an 18-month time frame. Although we are looking at it month to month, I think strategically we need to extrapolate our thinking to 18 months, and I think within that we need to really nuance what is short-term thinking and what is long-term. And long-term is almost 18 months and perhaps beyond the 18 months. So if you have a look at the global scenarios, and these have been in existence for a few years, so they're not new, but what has emerged that is new is right in the middle, we have COVID-19 pandemic, which Clem Sunter and myself talk about as a camel's straw. We had an uncertain global environment, and now we've got this pandemic, which is just the catalyst that has really changed the game in many ways. So, you know, one world or a divided world still exists, and looking at global growth into the future or looking at a global recession into the next 18 months is the other key question. So there is a scenario called New Balls Please, which is a growth scenario, which I don't think anybody at the moment is seriously considering strategically for the next 18 months. We might be down in a UV where we might see a little bit of growth as some countries are coming down or coming out of lockdowns, and we might see a little bit of a V where we dropped and we now start to come back up, but probably not either. U is where we might see ourselves, definitely different speeds of countries coming out of lockdowns and maybe getting back into economic growth. So we're probably sitting more in hard time scenario or even a fork lightning scenario. Hard time scenario means we do go into a global recession, but we've got the world collaborating. We have a global view, we're dealing with the pandemic in a more collaborative way. We've got all of our international institutions working together, and we go to a hard time scenario. And I don't think that that's at play at the moment. I actually think we're more in a divided world. So the fork lightning scenario, global recession on the cards, and a divided world where we don't have a global view. Every country is strategizing for themselves. We've got increased protectionism starting to come into play. And I think underlying all of this, we have got some geopolitical tensions at play. So there's a tightrope between fork lightning and UV scenario. And as countries are coming out of lockdowns, that tightrope as to whether there will be a little bit of growth, they'll balance, or whether we're going to fork lightning is very important. And I think there are two big pulls at the moment. The one is a pull towards the fork lightning scenario, and that is around economic collapse. And we've started to see that playing out. And then there is another pull, and that's the rapid uptake of technology. And so we've always said technology is a disruptor, and we start talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And in one way, if we are going to see a global growth scenario, and we are going to see a new normal playing out, technology is going to be a big enabler within that new normal. And I think that we need to understand what the repercussions of that are as well. So if we sit with that in terms of the global situation, let's translate that into South Africa. Kevin? So South Africa, I think, in a bigger sense, has two key uncertainties that are driving our next 12 to 18 months. And that's really our economy and our social cohesion. So we're talking about lives and livelihoods, and we're talking about the balance. Lives are looking at the health side of things, and livelihoods are looking at the economic side. And we have a very different context to a lot of other countries that went into a pandemic and are dealing with a pandemic. Our starting point is extremely different. We were already in very low economic growth and economic growth scenario. Our levels of social cohesion are not necessarily as good as other countries. We don't have a lot of trust between government and business. So our starting point is from a very different base to other countries in the world. So if you have a look at our four scenarios, first of all, I'd like to look at the economic climate. I'm not talking about economic growth or economic decline. I'm talking about the climate in which we're existing. Positive economic climate or a negative economic climate. Social cohesion high or social cohesion low. And now we've got the pandemic. Four scenarios that could play out. Best case scenario, Nkosi Sekeleli, and I think Cyril Ramaphosa made mention at the end of his talk last night, God bless Africa, is a potential scenario that could play out. Solidarity Fund, where we do have fairly high levels of social cohesion and collaboration, and we're working together, but our economic climate is very negative. And if you think about Solidarity Fund as a scenario, it's a non-sustainable scenario. It's putting a bailout, it's putting the 500 billion package that we're putting into play, it's putting some other funds into play, but all that they're doing is providing food packages, It's providing lives and existence for people, but it's not going anywhere near a growth scenario. So the Solidarity Fund scenario is not a sustainable scenario, it's a short-term scenario. Free fall, Solidarity Fund, when it gets further and further into a negative economic climate, will move into a free fall scenario. And if we have free fall with low social cohesion and an economic climate that's very negative, we're going to see South Africa declining rapidly. And I think we're going to start seeing things like more military presence, police presence. We're going to start seeing things being taken to court. We're going to start seeing a collapse and no collaboration between government and business. We're going to start to see civil society not being as compliant as they were in the last 6 to 7 or 8 weeks. And rapidly, in the next 12 to 18 months, we could go into a free fall. So if you go to the next slide, Kevin. I think, and this is my take, just understanding the environment and connecting the dots, I think our current position is sitting between Solidarity Fund and a free fall scenario. And I've almost put it tending a little bit more towards free fall at this moment in time. And it is a strategic moment in time where we really do have to reflect and say, what kind of leadership have we got? What kind of decisions are being made? Because it can very quickly move further into a free fall scenario. I've given a very small arrow to Nkosi. We would have to really focus on what we need to do to get collaboration going. We're going to need far more partnership between business and government in order to get into that best case scenario. And I think a mind the gap scenario is also a dangerous scenario to be in because it's a more exclusive scenario. So we're going to start to see low levels of social cohesion. We're going to start to see some positive economic growth, but in certain sectors, and it's going to be a far more exclusive type of scenario. You're going to increase the gap between the haves and the have-nots, increase the levels of inequality that are going to show up in many different ways. So I don't think that it's also a scenario that South Africa would want to fall into. And we could, if we look at some of the decisions that are being put in place, some of the regulation, it certainly could be driving a mind the gap type of scenario. So if you go to the next slide, Kevin. So I've put 4 flags that I would be watching in terms of those scenarios at the moment. They're not business related. You would have your own flags depending on what sector that you're in. But certainly duration of the lockdown phases is one of the key uncertainties that businesses are facing at the moment. Even to last night, we wanted a little bit of definition in terms of how long are we going to be in alert phase 4 of the lockdown, when are we going to phase 3, and how quickly can we get to 2, and what happens in those different levels. And different industries are in different contexts in relation to how long the lockdown phases last. Tourism, for example, really is going to absolutely struggle because it's down at level 2 and level 1. If we have a look at some of the other sectors, education, we're going to, understand what happens in the different lockdown phases, who goes back when, and we need a little bit of clarity in terms of the type of measurements and evidence that takes us into those different levels. The degree of collaboration between business and government, I think, is a key flag to be watching, because unless that starts to happen, we're going into a free fall type of scenario. The quality of communication from government. And I know a lot of people have spoken about this, but it really does need to be clear, concise, and cohesive. So when we're saying one thing and doing another, we're getting contradictory communication. It tends to increase our levels of anxiety, and then it takes us into the free fall scenario. And then the other flag I was going to look at was the degree of collaboration between political parties. And that's a slightly longer term flag. We have the DA coming out with certain statements that perhaps are playing politically towards the ANC. We have the EFF, who actually on Freedom Day came out with a manifesto and a talk that if you have a look what they're starting to say, they're taking an Africa perspective, and they're almost playing to the xenophobia that South Africa has. So again, political parties could also lead to a free fall scenario in South Africa. So they're big flags, but they are flags that in this next 6 months, 12 months, I would be watching very, very carefully to actually see where we're going. And those will also help to define the duration of the lockdown phases. So if you go to the next slide. I've tried to put together a couple of uncertainties that are all colliding, and we're having to connect the dots. One doesn't sit in isolation of the other. But I think sitting probably more so in the political arena at the moment, the consequences of political decision are around job losses, around our productivity, how quickly and how productive we can be, our economic recovery, the health of the nation, our political will, and not only our political will, but our political capacity to actually deal with this pandemic. And all of the other dots that connect with the pandemic, and then the collaboration between government and the private sector. From an economic perspective, I've highlighted education disruption, and I've highlighted it because also skills are very important. There are going to be huge consequences of education being in lockdown, how we go back into our education system if we do it all this year. Some talk about taking a gap year this year and starting 2021. What are the repercussions of those sorts of decisions? The types of industries, I think, are very, very interesting as to who's going to survive, who's not going to survive. And I don't think I'd like to talk about winners and losers. I think I'd rather take types of industries into who's going to be innovative, because types of industries are going to be, how do you innovate out of this and how do you change in terms of the new normal? And customer behavior, of course, is certainly changing, and we're seeing that already in the retail sector. And then I just wanted to highlight finally another set of uncertainties, and these relate directly to business, and it is about the future world of work. So it is what the workplace is going to look like into the future, what our business models are going to be looking like, and I think we have to question the business models. The structure of the business probably is going to change in many of your industries. And then what does the fourth industrial revolution actually mean for us? And I think we're going to have to finally accept we're going to have more automation, we're going to have more mechanization, we're going to have different communication through technology. Education is going to look very different. And I think, you know, South Africa has had the debate of job losses versus technology. And I think finally that debate actually has to leave us. We have to move with the times in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, and we're going to have to innovate and understand what that means for us. So those are a couple of things: the global scenarios where we're sitting, South African scenarios really on the knife's edge to a free fall at the moment, and then some of the key uncertainties that we have to look at from businesses. So Kevin, I'd like to open it up, and we can take it from there.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. It was very interesting, incisive. Actually, I'd like to invite you to comment on how you see those scenarios and how you see them affecting specifically the education sector. If you'd like to chat on that.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Chantell. It's quite interesting, Chantell, that you put that marker at a fairly depressed economy. It's important to note that within the higher education sector, we are very reliant on government, and with a depressed economy, also having a 46% reliance on state for our subsidy. State also influences our tuition fees to the extent that we are an autonomous institution and a sector, but over the last while, the last few years, state has actually influenced the increases in tuition fees. So if you look at it, between 89 and 90% is influenced by state, a very important stakeholder in higher education. And another important point being made by yourself, Chantell, was decisive leadership. And I think the president showcased that at the initial stages of the lockdown. I must be honest, I was fairly disappointed last night that there was a lack of decisiveness. He sort of scattered around a few issues, stating that things will be mentioned. But I think what the nation was searching for last night was some certainty. And so it's very important for the higher education sector that we achieve some level of certainty. But will there be some stimulus from government in higher education? The answer is an absolute no. I think there are so many departments and sectors of our economy that is dependent upon state that higher education will have to take a back seat when it comes to a stimulus package, which means that over the next while, higher education will have to dig deep. They're going to have to be fairly innovative in terms of how they're going to stabilize the revenue model, as well as how they're going to stabilize the cost model. Universities per se are not inclined to search for a profit, but any business model out there says that we have to have a profit motive. Unless you have that, one is not able to cater for the future. And why certain universities at this stage will be able to survive is simply because they had strong and robust financial management in the past. And that'll be a big learning for many of the universities in South Africa. I think for UCT, we've been fortunate. We've driven a robust set of financial principles, and we are able to navigate the storm. I wouldn't say easily, it's always with difficulty, but that is not going to be the same into the future. But what is the outlook? What is the outlook at the moment for the sector? We're definitely going to be looking at a 12-month academic year. Definitely for 2020, we will move right up to the end of 2020. We're more than likely going to complete the 2020 academic year in around about Feb of next year, which means we're gonna have an intake in March for the 2021 academic year. That'll take us once again straight into the end of 2021. And I foresee a potential 12-month academic year in higher education, at least for the next 2 years, at least. In terms of financing options, I mean, stability and sustainability is extremely important. So diversity of income streams is going to be at the forefront of the thinking in higher education. And Chantell, a very, very important comment you made about collaboration. Unless universities step out of their comfort zones and start collaborating, you have strong universities in South Africa and you have some weaker universities. Collaboration between universities within South Africa is going to become very, very important. But also collaboration with universities outside of the African continent. I think we will have to come together as a higher education sector globally. Then in terms of change, universities, if you look at how students have been educated over the last 100 years, the lecture rooms look exactly the same today as they did before. We started talking about blended learning and remote learning for a long time now. We put certain models in place at the UCT to get to this new way of learning. And suddenly you get this COVID-19 lockdown and we are forced to go that route. And so I think change has suddenly become a real possibility in higher education. I think that's a massive positive for UCT and also for higher education. We've been forced to go a certain route. We've suddenly found that new possibilities is new ways of learning is real, and we can accommodate. I'm gonna pause there, Kevin. I think it gives you a little bit of a sense in terms of what is possible. But I want to end up by just talking about the enrollments. So we have this rigid approach to enrollments. Students enroll at the beginning of the year, and they see the year through. But I'm going to pose a few questions. What's the possibility in South Africa and maybe globally of flexible enrollments year-round? How about having a different set of rules for online learning and a different set of rules for face-to-face learning? How about a possibility of a different revenue model for online as opposed to face-to-face? So and so there's a few questions I believe is going to be posed to higher education, and unless we get back after lockdown with very firm ideas about how we're going to shape the future, I think certain universities in higher education are going to be left behind. Now is the time to start thinking about how we're going to address the student body, how we're going to address the rest of South Africa, how we're going to give some more confidence to parents out there who are wanting their kids to go to university. Please remember that going to university is not a right, it's a privilege. Education is a right, but going to university is a privilege. And so the higher education sector needs to be reacting in a positive way with some certainty and giving some confidence to the nation. Because as Kevin said, our country and our economy needs the graduates to come through university. It's going to be more in need now than ever before. Allow me to pause there, Kevin, and I'm happy to take some questions later.
Monty, if you want to unmute yourself, would you like to give your thoughts from a retail perspective, consumer perspective on Chantell's scenarios?
Yeah, thanks very much, Kevin. Before I sort of give an opinion or try and tie it into what Chantell has sort of mentioned earlier, I just want to quickly paint a little bit of a picture of what retail is currently seeing and what we are currently experiencing. Just to start off with what we've been hearing and seeing, I mean, we initially saw panic buying within that week before lockdown, and sort of a significant increase in people buying or consumers buying sanitizers, toilet paper. We had shelves which were unstocked, running empty, saw pictures going around the media showing these empty shelves and really getting everyone into pretty much a panic state. What we've seen with our approximately 30,000 cardholders or members of our organization, who are obviously consumers, has been a slowdown in spend during April. They've spent approximately 30% less than what they normally do, less visits to the stores. That's approximately a 20% decline. And then their baskets have been larger. They've been spending 40% more than what they normally would do. If you have a look at the major fast-moving consumer good retailers out there, Pick n Pay's results came out a few days ago. You would have noticed that they aren't going to be paying a dividend, and that really speaks to the point that cash is king. EdCon, even before the lockdown, was speaking about business rescue, about closing stores, about trying to reposition. And I guess the question is, you know, they're a South African icon on the retail or in the retail space, and is this the last of the dinosaur department stores? Then if you have a look at Massmart, I mean, they announced the closure of all their Dion Wired stores and the possible, and probably will now, resizing of game stores to reduce them, and the removal of fresh groceries, etc. The other thing that I think has played a fairly important role within the retail sector is just potentially the reputational damage or impact on trust with regards to the closure of retail stores. You know, where there've been positive COVID cases. Our closest mall, which is Blue Route Mall, I just got a SMS from my wife to say that Clicks had closed down at Blue Route around lunchtime today. So you can see there's this continuous impact on retail where, you know, it creates a potential reputational damage and a decrease in trust. One of the positive things that has taken place during this time period has been the increase in online sales, and Pick n Pay in their results indicated that the online sales have increased approximately 200%. And you've seen a surge as well with Woolworths. And then Shoprite Checkers, I think either were fortuitous or saw COVID ahead of us. Possibly they've been talking to Chantell quite a bit. And they introduced the 60/60, their online shopping and grocery delivery service in December. And it's quite interesting. Apparently in the beginning, there was a high demand, but systems were shut down, their online systems. And during the lockdown now, things have quietened down. And the reason for that is that Shoprite Checkers instituted a 35 Rand cost per delivery. And so you're able to now go on to ShopRite Checkers facility and able to do your 60/60 shopping there. So if we have a look at the challenges that are facing the retail sector, just quickly to go through that, all of us have experienced salary cuts and the retrenchments that are taking place as well. Keep in mind that disposable income is the equivalent of 62% of our GDP. And currently what we are seeing is a 20% reduction in disposable income. So if I had to have my looking glasses on and crystal ball in front of me, I'd be predicting that the GDP, if we continue in the lockdown we currently have, is going to contract by about 12%. And keep in mind that our economists and financial sector are suggesting 6%, which would be the greatest contraction since the 1931 Great Depression. So it's fairly significant. Every 2 out of 3 people or South Africans are actually in financial difficulty currently, and that's significant. Just think about your own family. If you're a family of 5, potentially that entire family is in financial trouble. The other thing that is a major challenge has been the agriculture sector. It's had 7 consecutive quarters of contraction, and it's sitting at the bottom of the pile in terms of contributing to GDP. And that brings to question just food security. I imagine many of those farmers out there are questioning whether they should still be farming, and accordingly, are we going to have enough food going forward? Something else to take into account is that a high percentage of our imports come from the most affected COVID-19 countries or regions: China, USA, UK, and the EU. So that potentially, once lockdown is eased within those areas and lockdowns eased in our area, there's still going to be a challenge in terms of getting imports into South Africa. Davy Ritt, the economist, I think a week or so ago, mentioned that we're probably going to lose between 100 and 200,000 businesses are going to be expected to close. How many of those in retail? Not too sure, but I think, you know, the normal numbers in terms of restaurants, etc., are certainly going to close down. And then a loss of jobs of potentially 1 million. So the lockdown as well, it's costing the economy 10 billion rand a day. And to date, that's approximately 500 billion rand. Just think about the Solidarity Fund and how much money has been contributed to that. I don't want to be all doom and gloom, so I just want to share a couple of opportunities, and they were mentioned earlier. Chantell and Ashley both spoke to these, or a couple of these. Innovation. South Africans love innovating. Just think of Elon Musk. And where we have got a bit of strength in terms of innovation and supporting COVID, social distancing, etc., and what the future is going to look like is around contactless payments and as well online shopping. Sure, online shopping at this point in time, low penetration rates, low uptake prior to COVID-19, but maybe this is the stimulus which is going to get the flywheel moving here, and online shopping is going to increase significantly. We've seen the growth of small entrants into the online shopping space or assisting with it. A company called One Cart, which assists with shopping duties for consumers. And then a fairly new introduction is Zalzi, a new online shopping aggregator, and where you can go and shop and pick the best price from any of the retail stores. The second area of opportunity is diversification of services. Example here is Net Florist, who are no longer distributing flowers during this time period, but they're actually taking orders and deliveries and making deliveries for fast-moving consumer goods. Then the third point is just the positive lockdown habits. I think the fact that family is getting together, sitting around a table, having a meal, I think that's highly positive. It's important for the overall health of the individuals, of the families, and I think of the country itself. So these are likely to translate into long-term habits, but they're certainly going to have an impact on some of the other sectors, but maybe a positive impact on retail. So instead of going out and spending time at a restaurant or a movie house, you're more than likely going to pick up your home cooked meal from Pick n Pay or Checkers. And then the fourth point, and this is something that's already there, but probably on the horizon in South Africa, and that's virtual malls. So where you can do all your online shopping, feel like you're in a mall, and go ahead and do that. I just want to quickly have a look at 3 current global exits scenarios that are playing out. It's rebound, which was the V that Chantell was speaking to. It's reboot, which is the U that you were speaking to, and reinvent, which is either the L or W. Australia is coming out of its, exiting its lockdown, and it's seen to be the early adopter of the rebound approach. And that's really saying that they're going to rebound, the economy will be back to normal health within the next few months, possibly next few weeks. France are also in the reboot, they're in the reboot mode, and they're starting to loosen restrictions. That started on Monday. Face mask wearing is still going to take place. School distancing and downsizing of classrooms is taking place, and then an increase of fresh foods which are being bought online. And I think keep that in mind, because that's possibly where South Africa are going. Spain are into the reinvent space, and that's still going to take them a long time to actually get back on track. But non-essential workers or services and the workers related to that are returning to work, and e-commerce is continuing to grow. So maybe just to end off, where is South African retail heading? As we're seeing from last night's communication by the President, Level 3 will be coming back into play, or will be coming into play 1st of June, and that's going to see more sectors allowed to return to their work environments and starting up again. Keep in mind that we're being warned that the height of COVID positive cases and deaths is likely going to take place towards the end of August, early September. However, there is talk of that possibly happening even earlier, and that's around July. The lack of tourism until 2021, there's talk of flights, especially long distance flights, not being allowed until next year. So lack of tourism in both internally and externally. So that's us traveling around our country. Maybe our festive season holidays or December holidays are going to be restricted. That's going to have a huge impact on retail. Traditional high spend shopping days, such as Black Friday, the festive season over December, and then even into Easter 2021. I'm not sure that's going to do enough to actually kickstart the economy back to where it needs to be. So in my opinion, I think we're going to follow a W recovery, one that will take at least 18 months. I think what's going to happen is, as soon as level 3 kicks in, we're going to see the economy starting to improve again. And then in July, August, September, once the COVID-19 really hits us, we're going to see a significant downturn again. It's going to take a long time to actually see recovery. Something else that I heard both Chantell and Ashley speak to is government intervention. I think it's very, very important. They're going to be required to stimulate the economy, which is, you might say, why them and not business? The reason being that I think they need to start putting more spend into infrastructure. If you think back to 2010 World Cup, the amount of infrastructure and government spend that took place between 2000 and 2010 was, I think, partly responsible for why we were a little bit more successful than many other economies and countries around the world in being able to deal with the 2009 global recession. However, and I say a huge however, so much of the focus currently is on health by the government, understandably so. But are they possibly not just taking their ball off the economy? And do they really understand the economy? Do they understand how to get it kick-started and back to the new normal, or to create the new normal? And to maybe end with a quote from Richard Brasher, from the CEO of Pick n Pay, from his announcement of Pick n Pay's results earlier in the week. He said, "It's difficult to predict the full impact of the pandemic on the 2021 results of Pick n Pay." So he's looking forward 12 months and saying, I don't really know where we're going. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty in retail, and it's going to be fairly difficult to plan forward. Thanks, Kevin.
Chantell, I thought you painted a very gloomy picture. Monty just took it to the next level there.
I know.
Thanks for that, Monty. I'll just slash my wrist now quickly. Look, I think obviously I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Retail, I think, is in the crosshairs. I think they're feeling a lot of pain right now. I think another industry that's really going to feel some pain, and you perhaps alluded to it, is actually the property sector. With all those retail stores backing down, letting up space, making their stores smaller, that's going to impact the retail property space. I think the commercial property space is actually feel a lot of pain from this, because what this forced lockdown has done, and the longer it goes, the more we adapt. Again, as you correctly said, South Africans are a very adaptive society. We find a way. We don't wait to see what's going to happen. We find a way to make it happen. And I think a lot of small businesses, middle-sized businesses, even some larger corporates are realizing that you actually can work remotely. People can work from home. And the impact on that is people are going to be looking at their lease contracts and going, well, I could save a lot of money on rent there. That will help what I'm losing on the top line and help my bottom line. So I think there's going to be a fairly large amount of commercial properties coming on the market. The market values, property values of those will go down, and I think the rental rates will drop quite significantly as well. But in our little sector, technology sector, one nice thing about wars and pandemics and famines and all sorts of disasters is it breeds innovation, and technology is at the forefront of that. So we're seeing so many big steps forward in technology. Having sessions like this on webinar is becoming commonplace now. I think it was Zoom went from 5 million users to 200 million users in 3 weeks at the beginning of this year. I mean, those are just unbelievable numbers. And those stocks are, I mean, those sectors are actually flying, which is great. And, you know, obviously, I think the other big challenge, and one which directly impacts us, is obviously the challenge that every business has in working out where they are now and where they're going to be. Because the budgets that they did 3 months ago are not worth the paper they're written on. Everything has changed. You know, a lot of people rely on predictive analytics. You know, we've just brought it into our solution, but unfortunately, I said, we've just built all this in, and I'm wondering if we wasted our time, because you cannot predict the future with COVID-19 blocking out a big chunk of your past. You can't use the past to forecast forward with that sort of a black hole, if you like. So, you know, there's definitely challenges. There's definitely opportunities as well. I like to look for the opportunities. I'm a very positive individual. I think it's good to see how people like NetFlorist are adapting their business, for example, to adapt. And again, that's what we're good at. I think the other thing that you alluded to is the retail, so online shopping. I think that's an interesting one. And I know that I actually wanted to have a chat with you about that as well. But certainly, my personal feeling is online shopping is something that South Africans have been a bit backward in taking on. I think we're a little bit conservative. We don't like putting our credit card onto the internet and hoping that the goods will arrive. The rest of the world's way ahead of us. Again, lockdown has proven that we can do it. And having done it once, it's a lot easier to do it a second time and a third time and a fourth time. And again, that's going to put pressure on your retail sector, those that aren't in the digital world. So I'm not going to speak for too much longer, because I think we're getting a few interesting questions coming through. And before I go out to the sort of the questions that are being logged by individuals or attendees, I know that Monty, you had a question you wanted to ask Ashley around your children, college, schools, and universities, and where they sit this year.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I've got 2 daughters at varsity, one at UCT, one at Stellenbosch, and a daughter who's in grade 11.
We'll forgive you for the Stellenbosch daughter, Monty. I'm sure Ashley will forgive you for that.
I'll mention that to her. So yeah, and a daughter in grade 11 at a private school, and they have been back since I think schools were meant to go back. So the likelihood of that of my daughter in grade 11 completing school in 2020 is fairly high. And the challenge, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Ashley, where you said that it's likely the intake for UCT will be in March 2021. There is this possibility that you're going to have some kids finishing grade 12 next year who should have been in grade 12, and some finishing grade 12 who should have finished it in 2020. What's the impact going to be on universities? How are they going to deal with that, especially with the limited number of positions and openings to apply for various different degrees? I mean, is there a risk that we're going to lose some of our talent overseas?
No, thanks, Mark.
Overseas? Sorry.
No, no, absolutely. But thanks for that question. Before I do answer that, considering you have one daughter at Stellenbosch and one UCT, you need to understand UCT fees first and then Stellenbosch, and that's just how it works. So please remember that. It's important to note, it's an interesting question. It's important to note that basic education is a feeder to higher education. To feed the economy, we need to create the pipeline out of higher education into the economy. But if I can just reference higher education currently, yes, we want to complete the academic year and we committed to completing the academic year. But what is beginning to happen this year in 2020 is that we anticipate quite a few students canceling courses because they may begin to question the capacity in order their own capacity to complete courses this year. That is possible within higher education, which means that they need to carry over those courses into 2021. The minute they begin to do that, they create a blockage for students coming in. But in order for our education sector to work, the pipeline needs to be fluid. It has to flow continuously. The one moves 1 year, creates a space, the other moves in. Now, if that is not created, yes, of course, there's a risk of your kids going outside of South Africa. But this pandemic is not located at UCT or to the Western Cape or in South Africa. It's located globally. And so students and families are going to begin to ask lots and lots of questions. But because of the injustice of the past within South Africa, it's very, very important that government needs to step in and create some certainty, because without us feeding our very depressed economy with good quality students, I mean, the students coming through the pipeline now is really going to be running the economy in the next 10 to 15 years. We need to begin and we need to maintain that fluidity. And so if government doesn't set the tone, then we as higher education, we and also the basic education sector is going to suffer. We need to create that pipeline. Otherwise, we are going to be losing students. However, with innovation in play, students may begin to react differently. And there is this push for short-term learning. And maybe the question is going to come very soon. Do we have to go the 4-year degree? Do we have to go degree and then honors and then lock yourself into university for 5 to 6 years? Maybe this pandemic will begin to get students to think differently. And maybe a puzzle effect of creating a knowledge base of a 6 months course here and a 6 months course there, and start building a platform of education as opposed to a 4-year degree and a 2-year honors degree. I mean, so that's the risk to higher education. But is that a bad thing? I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we're going to have innovation within the university sector. We're going to have innovation from students per se. We're going to have innovation between amongst families. Parents are going to begin to think differently. And so universities and the higher education sector needs to ready itself to stay ahead of the game. And using the old model is not going to work. The pipeline, I believe, in direct response to your question, I think there's going to be a blockage in the pipeline. And we're going to have to react positively, and we have to bring in innovation to be able to circumvent that.
Cool. I think
can I just make a quick statement there, or a comment? I think it's a perfect time for education to innovate and change, because it hasn't been disrupted for what, about 100 years. and you know, the future world of work is different. So actually this is really an opportunity for education to innovate and understand future needs and move and change quickly.
Cool. Okay, I'm actually going to jump into some questions from the attendees because there's quite a few interesting ones. The first one I want to pick on is Miles, who's got a question for Ashley or Chantell. So since Chantell's been the quietest, we'll let Chantell answer first. The question goes, with the battle to get back to global and local growth long term, where does this leave the fight against climate change that we're running out of time on? How will economies cope with the dual challenges of reducing environmental impact, but also supporting industry and encouraging commerce that is unsustainable at current levels?
I think the environmental question is an interesting one because, you know, we were gathering momentum on the environmental. We had Davos at the beginning of the year. Really, the focus was on environmental issues. We're looking at coal and fossil fuels, etc. So I think your question says, where does that leave environmental issues? I don't think it's going to be left behind. I almost think it's now going to start to be integrated. I've been doing quite a bit of work with companies and stock exchanges and markets, etc. And I think they're starting to move towards looking at how sustainable is your business, and are you looking at social impacts, are you looking at environmental impacts, rather than just the profit at all costs. So I think there's going to be a positive spin on environmental issues that'll actually come to the fore in this reinvention of the new normal. That's just my take on that. Ashley?
Ashley, you got a thought? You need to unmute yourself, Ash.
No, I don't have anything to add. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay. Monty, I know there was something you mentioned the other day on the environmental impact of lockdown. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually been one of the fortunate few who've had an opportunity to drive in from where I live in the southern suburbs into town for work. And what's been noticeable are the exceptionally crisp and beautiful days. And very clear air. And, you know, you're hearing of, I think it's in Venice, first time they've seen clean water there for many a year, clean air. And I'm wondering if this is not, there's a lot more to this and a lot more benefits, especially in the environmental space. But having said that, yeah, time is running out in terms of, and I think business has a huge role to play, but also government in terms of taking actions around how we manage our environments.
I think, Kevin, if I may, I think in the concept of sustainability, we're going to have to think of the three pillars of sustainability. That's going to be finance, the environment, as well as the social sustainability. And I think going forward post-COVID, unless we sync those three, I think we're going to be in trouble. The one can't be done at the expense of the other. The economy needs to grow. We need to look after our environment, and in South Africa especially, the social sustainability is so important.
I think that actually leads on very nicely to another question here from Michael O'Rourke. I'll paraphrase his question because it's quite long. His point is basically that when we come out of lockdown, businesses are going to be very keen to get the most out of their employees and drive things to try and catch up. On the other hand, the employees are going to be thinking a lot more about health, work-life balance, the important things in life, I guess, from an employee's perspective. How do you balance those two? And is there where is the mindset of the organization going to be when it needs to get as much out of its employees, but it also needs to take cognizance of where the employees are coming from post-COVID-19? Chantell?
I'll give a little bit of a take on that. I think the concept of well-being really has to be questioned. We started to bring it up, you know, well-being of employees and what it means, and it was a little bit of a side tack on in the HR space. And I think that that is going to come to the fore in terms of well-being into the future. Having seen us working from home, you know, people saying actually it's more exhausting working from home, the social contact, the productivity of people. So I think coming out of lockdown, wanting to get more out of your employees, I'm not too sure what the more would be, because it's now about the balance of how you do things. So more in terms of time, more in terms of input. I'm not too sure with that, but I think the mental well-being of people will definitely have to shift in the workplace, and it's a very big HR strategic question as to how to handle employees in your business going forward.
Anybody else with thoughts?
Yeah, if this is the Michael O'Rourke that I do know, then it's a gentleman that moved from the tech space in the economy to mindfulness. And if that is the mic, then I think that is going to be the order of the day moving forward, and that is a concept of mindfulness. And employers and the economy at large will have to find this very extreme balance between driving the economy hard and also satisfying the needs and the health and the well-being of staff. And if leaders of industry can be mindful and attach the concept of mindfulness in their workplace and marry that with the mindfulness of staff, I think we are readying ourselves for a more balanced environment. But yes, there's going to be a push and pull scenario. Yes, I think there'll be some demands, but staff working at home, it hasn't been easy working at home, and there's been a very nice balance being with family. But there's also a very intense desire to get back into that social cohesion in the workplace. And so I think there will be a lot to give, and there needs to be a balance between the demand and the giving.
I think from my side, my only thought on that is that I think the workplace is going to change a lot. I think there's going to be a lot more remote working when we come out the other side of this. So I think people who perceive that, you know, once this is all over, we're all going to be back into the same big office doing the same job with everybody doing the same. I don't think that's realistic. I think there is going to be change, certainly in many, many industries. And Michael says, thank you. Willem from UNISA has raised a couple of issues, obviously, in the education space. I know Ashley knows him well, as do I. But at least he's got a positive take. He says, over the last 5 years, you've had lots of challenges in higher education. Hashtag fees must fall, hashtag roads must fall, hashtag outsource must fall. And he says that's all come at a huge cost, and by implication forced change in behaviours. This is just another opportunity for higher education. So I think he's echoing your thoughts there, Ashley, and your Chantell.
Willem mustn't forget about the water crisis and the ESCOM crisis. I mean, we have many crises in the last while.
I'm sure they'll have comments on that as well. Just one last question, because we are running out of time. There's a question on tourism. With tourism down and adding 2.8% to the GDP, how will this impact us locally? As they have said, the possibility of nearly 100,000 job losses. Do you think what do you think the best advice would be moving forward in terms of someone being in the tourism sector? Now, obviously, we're all in Cape Town, and that is more prevalent to us than probably anywhere else in the country. So, thoughts? Oh, Monty, you can go first.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, it's difficult to give advice to someone who's in the tourism industry, and I'm not. I'm not too sure I'd want to be in the tourism industry right now, because I think if there is one sector that it's going to take a lot longer to actually recover from what we're currently experiencing, and was already under severe pressure before COVID-19, then it's probably the tourism sector. For example, I had organized a couple of trips away in April and now in June to the Kruger Park. And I felt quite guilty canceling both trips and asking for a refund. I was almost inclined to say, you know, please take 50% or even take the full amount, because I'd already written it off in my, you know, in my books. And please, you know, take it, because I feel for you. So My recommendation, you need to diversify in some way. If you remain in tourism purely, you are going to be seriously challenged. And so consider what else you can do in the interim, how you can take your skill sets and utilize them elsewhere. Maybe if you're a tour operator, you can use your vehicle to transport people to work and back. I'm not sure many of our bus services and taxis would be happy, but you've really got to look at diversification. Use the net florist example as a means to try and kickstart your thinking and to obviously try and identify a way that you can get back on track. But I do feel for you in the tourism, in the tourism sector. It's not a nice place to be. Chantell?
Just a quick thought on tourism, and again in terms of Cape Town, we are next week starting with the various stakeholders to build some scenarios for the tourism sector going forward, because it is a critical sector. I think there would be a definite shift for tourism to think about a domestic market, because we're going to be going closer to home to start with. And a lot of our tourism sector doesn't really relate to domestic markets. So what does that mean? So it's a mindset shift for the sector. And I think also perhaps looking at costing and pricing models, one would have to say, where can I still exist and participate in the sector in that way? So I think there are going to have to be some fundamental questions being asked and mindset shift in the tourism sector for it to slowly be able to come back and recover. Yeah.
Right, I think we've slightly over time, guys. I'd like to thank Chantell, Ashley, Monty for joining myself, Kevin, with this session. I hope the attendees have got a lot of value out of it. We have been recording it, so I will make a copy available tomorrow. And thank you very much. And I will call it to an end at that. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you.